Hi, I'm Janet Steady, and I come from across the street, and I work at Nutrition Works as a nutrition consultant. And I've been in this field for almost 20 years now, and it's my pleasure to come and do these kind of group talks. And my goal is that if you each leave with at least one golden nugget or something new that you hadn't thought about before, then I'll feel successful. I like very much to keep it interactive. I know you're eating lunch, so I'll start with some information, and as we go through, if you feel like you're not getting your needs met or there's questions that you have that aren't being covered, feel free to ask questions and we can take it as it comes. So I really just want to use the slides as a platform for a good discussion. Okay, so the title, it says it all, is just really a basic fundamentals of sports nutrition talk. So I always, when I'm working with individuals or groups, I think it's very important to always know what are your goals, okay? Because that's the way you can decide how to move forward. So when we're talking about the most basic goals of sports nutrition, number one is to stay hydrated. So considering your hydration status overall and before and after and during events is very important. Second thing would be to fuel your muscles. So I really like the concept of looking at food as fuel as opposed to fattening. I think if you reframe it in that way, it becomes easier to choose a healthy diet. And then the third thing would be to give your muscles the fuel they need and to recover and build strength if that's what your goals are. So having said that, as we go through the talk, I really tried to appeal to both the recreational exerciser and the competitive athlete. So it's going to be important to decide which one of those you are and to take the information and apply it to yourself. Okay, so a lot of times in sports nutrition they talk about nutrition what and nutrition when. And so the what, I have a feeling you're all pretty familiar with. And this is just a one slide that pretty much catches it all. So I'll just run through it and give you a chance to eat. But basically athletes need more of calories and carbohydrates. And the reason for that is because you have higher energy demands and because carbohydrates will help you to replenish your glycogen. So as we're going to see on the next slide, glycogen is the storage form of carbohydrate in our bodies. We all know that we store extra calories as fat, but we also store carbohydrates in the form of glycogen. The difference is that it's a much more limited supply. So you have a small supply in your liver, and that's what helps keep your blood sugar relatively stable throughout the day, and you have some in your muscles. And so that's what actually will cause those muscle contractions and fuel different types of physical activity. So when we think of carbohydrates, I like to think it's never quite black and white, but I think of them as the plant foods. And so they originally get their energy from the sun. So when we eat them, we also are getting the original energy from the sun, which I think is fascinating. And so good examples of carbohydrates are whole grains, vegetables, fruits, and beans. And then, like I said, there is no black and white. Dairy also provides carbohydrate in the form of lactose. And then there's different products on the market that would have added sugars in them that would also be considered carbohydrates. So I always think, there's been this whole kind of carbohydrate phobia out there. It kind of replaced the fat phobia that was occurring in the 1990s. I always want to just put a plug in that they're plants. They come from the earth. And so just intuitively, I would think twice before I decided to go on a low carbohydrate diet because it's a beautiful design and it's exactly what your body is intended to run on. And for the record, your brain can only run on glucose, so there's another plug for carbohydrates. So one of my favorite words you'll see throughout the talk, that balance is a word that I love, context is a word that I love. So it's really important to put everything that you learn about nutrition in context and always ask yourself, what is the intention behind the behavior? And try to make sense of it by applying it to yourself and your situation. Okay. So we talked about hydration. That's very important. So that old adage of 8-ounce glasses a day, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that or not, but that was something we used to say. It still holds true, and it's a good goal. Healthy fats are important. We talk a lot about monounsaturated or unsaturated fats because those are the heart-healthy fats. So good sources of those are olive oil, canola oil, flaxseed oil, avocado, and then nuts and seeds. And then protein. Protein is like a big marketing ploy now. They put protein on everything. Every box you come across, they have, added protein to it, or they want to make sure if it was naturally occurring that you know about it. I think there's a commercial on now where the two women are in the car driving and she stops short and she's eating yogurt. And she says, I'm getting my protein, protein, protein. So while it is important, it's just one of the 3 macronutrients we need for health and for energy. And usually when people are consuming enough calories, they're getting enough protein.
Isn't that, in conjunction with what you just said, better to get your protein in a naturally occurring source than to add it to yogurt, add it to all
I completely agree. And you'll see that as my ethos as we go through.
It's in your cereal, it's in your yogurt, it's in everything you touch. And I'm like, what about the eggs and the nuts?
Exactly. My whole line as a dietitian is food first, always. I'm very wary of supplements. I think it's a huge market, and you do have to ask yourself, like, what is the added protein? Did it come from, soy protein isolate, and is that good for you? And edamame, which is the natural soybean, yes, you could argue that comes right from the earth and has health benefits. But if you start manufacturing it and processing it and isolating it, so to say, and then adding it to foods that didn't have it naturally occurring, then I feel like that's where, human beings tend to mess with nature. And I totally agree, so thank you for making that point. Okay, so the point of this slide is very much just that the sports nutrition really starts with just a basic overall good diet. And the other thing that I'm going to thread through the talk as much as I can is my newfound passion for what is called intuitive eating. And it's kind of I'm happy to see that it's kind of gaining momentum, and there seems to be a paradigm shift happening out there where people are getting tired of diets. They're realizing they don't work. We're assessing whether or not we all need to be a certain size and what exactly is a healthy weight or body size. And can we take the focus off of weight and BMI and put it onto behaviors, so daily behaviors, and just realizing that sometimes good enough is enough. We don't all have to, nobody has to be perfect. So I am a big advocate of a more intuitive approach. So again, as we go through the next few slides, I put in numbers because I thought maybe a competitive athlete or someone who has a training goal or an event coming up might be interested in those. But I really want you to zoom out as much as possible and not get too preoccupied with numbers. Okay, so we touched already on this. This is the slide that would give you exactly the definition. And I guess the takeaway point here would be that glycogen stores are usually depleted after about 90 minutes of continuous exercise. And so time and intensity would matter in terms of when exactly your glycogen would be depleted. I think the idea is that if you're going at about 70% of your VO2 max for about 90 minutes, that's when the average person would run out of glycogen. So, if you're talking about like a day-long hike or something like that, since the intensity is so much lower, you're less likely to run out of glycogen and your liver and everything else. But it still would be important to plan healthy food and hydration. Okay. So what happens if you don't? Let's say you are doing an endurance event and you're going over 90 minutes. What do you think would happen if you don't have a plan in place? It's kind of in the literature, you might hear of it as hitting the wall or bonking. So that describes exactly this phenomenon, is that you've just run out of glycogen and you just would feel very fatigued, your mental energy would go down. It'd be really hard to go forward unless you had a plan to take in some carbohydrate. Any other questions at this point? I definitely want, now that you kind of got a chance to eat lunch and the talk is going, do you like this style of just listening, or do you want to talk about anything in particular or ask questions? Oh, no.
She raised a good point. Is coconut oil good?
So, interestingly enough, the whole trend with coconut oil came out when they were getting rid of trans fats. And I don't know if you're familiar with trans fats, but those were a synthetic fat where they took a vegetable oil, which was unsaturated, and hydrogenated it to make it saturated, and it turned into trans fat. So it was a human-made synthetic fat that was bad for you.
And hydrogenating it made it shelf stable? Is that
Correct.
the point?
Exactly. It was added as a preservative to many boxed goods. So things like crackers and cookies and anything that was in a bag or a box tended to have trans fat in it. Margarine also had trans fat. That's the way they took the vegetable oil and made it into a stick so it could be solid at room temperature. So that's just about the time when the coconut oil craze came in. So I do think part of it was a clever marketing ploy on their part. And so I think the research is controversial, I guess is what I'd say. I mean, what we do know is that saturated fat raises total cholesterol levels and your LDL cholesterol levels, which are the bad kind. And saturated fat are those fats that are solid at room temperature, so the marbled fat around meat and whole milk dairy products. And then also in palm kernel and coconut oil, it has a higher concentration of saturated fat. But I think then they started to study just the coconut oil, and they were finding that that wasn't the case, that it wasn't happening in these research studies. And the same thing with whole dairy products. They're getting touted now as maybe preferable to the non-fat, but you have to put everything back into context. So if we look at the whole fat dairy products, they're being touted because they're comparing them to non-fat, sugar-full yogurts and things like that. And so if you're making the argument that maybe having a plain whole fat Greek yogurt is better than having a sugar-full, fat-free, little Dannon or something, then you're probably right, because it has less sugar and it will sustain you longer and your blood glucose won't go up and down. Same with coconut oil. I feel like, in and of itself, if you had it as part of a healthy diet, it probably would be just fine. But it is a saturated fat, so I wouldn't overdo it. I would kind of, and I think that's what people started to do. They started to replace all the oils in their cupboards with coconut oil. And I feel like that's a good message right there. Just try to avoid extremes and try to incorporate nutrition messages moderately.
So do you tend to eat whole or higher fat, like dairy products, or do you go for no fat, low fat?
Okay, great question. So just one more thing about the coconut oil. What we do at home is we have them all. We have coconut oil, we have olive oil, we have canola oil, and we just mix and match. Sometimes we bake a granola bar that has a coconut oil, or I have a really good recipe that has coconut oil with broccoli, but I use it as part of a healthy diet, and I don't use it exclusively, and I still stick to small portions, which is kind of the message with all fats. Okay, and then the whole milk thing, preference really drives our food choices. And so because I've been so used to, I never got into the skim, but I always liked the 1%. And in terms of like Greek yogurt, I just like the non-fat. I like the non-fat plain. Ellie Krieger is a dietitian. She's kind of in the public media. She does some spots for the Today Show and things like that. She has a good cookbook out. I like her philosophy a lot. And so because we know the whole dairy is saturated, she has this idea that you should take non-fat yogurt or low-fat yogurt and then add healthy nuts or nut butter. So pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, if you like to mix a little peanut butter in there. And so that's what I do. Because we know that those things are full of those monounsaturated fats.
Yeah. Two things. Number one, I hear something about people that train more than I do for athletic things.
Yeah.
That you eat carbohydrates first, protein after.
Well, the idea there would be that you're giving the carbohydrates first to fuel the workout, and then the protein after to rebuild any muscle. Yeah, that might have been damaged during the workout. But as you're going to see, it's much more important to just have balanced mini meals and snacks, and to look at it like you're giving your body a pool of nutrients to draw on it when it needs it. And it's really important to figure out, like, what is your event, So in other words, for most people that maybe you're going out for a 5K or a 10K and you're just kind of training, most runs are less than an hour, that's when you really just focus on your nutrition. Yeah, just your general nutrition, making sure that you're training your body, your intestinal tract along the way. So a lot of times, like if it's a running event, people complain of jostling and different foods affecting them poorly. So that's another big point, is to make sure that nutrition is part of your training so you can figure out what works well for you. And then in line with intuitive eating, what I would encourage you to do is notice how you feel. Like let's say you just have carbohydrates before and you go out and you do it and then you just have protein after. Well, maybe you're going to realize, I would have done better with a little bit more of a balance. So connecting those dots and really understanding what works for you is important.
The other thing that I notice is there's so much out there. This is good, that's bad, this has been added, that's not there. Read this. If you don't read a lot, you're going to believe everything you see.
It's
and
true.
It's not all correct.
Well, that's the problem.
Good for you.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I was going to say the information highway that we're all have at our fingertips. That's the con. Honestly, that's where intuitive eating enters. It really teaches you that you have everything you need inside of you. and you don't need to look for external. I mean, of course, research and knowledge, but the idea is to marry the knowledge of the mind with the wisdom of the body, and to let go of a lot of that superfluous information that you come across. And you know, as much as I go through this field, I really feel like the fundamentals of nutrition never really change. I think what I could say about it is that people who seem successful at putting all the puzzle pieces together have just found what works for them. So I think that, again, is just a take-home point. A very good point. Okay, so then I just put this slide up here, you know, that whole, you hear like eat the rainbow is one of those things and people's eyes tend to gloss over, but it really is important, because the reason that's important is because the different colors represent different antioxidants, and antioxidants are really important for warding off damage from free radicals, which are basically byproducts of stress or metabolism, and also found in our environment. So as many times as you can, make sure you look down and see that your plate is colorful. That's actually known, the plate method is something that you can always take with you as your guide to nutrition. Let go of some of the stuff that you hear and just remember the fundamentals, which would be that about half your plate is colorful fruits and vegetables. The other part, about a quarter, would be some sort of a grain or carbohydrate. You have your protein here, and then any kind of extra like a dairy or a dessert or whatever it is that you're interested in. So I like the idea of calling that the balanced plate and kind of letting go of other food rules and just aiming for that. I feel like it's a little more doable and positive. Okay. So this is where it gets very intense with the numbers. And I find that this is a valuable slide for people who are training seriously. And I did use a lot of different reputable sources to pull this together, and so I feel proud of this slide, and also like it's a valuable slide for anyone who has been reading through the literature and just wants it summed up. What it is it, and I do have a disclaimer up there that says an athlete's daily calorie and nutrient needs are individual depending on age, gender, weight, activity level, and that would include duration and frequency, and then the quality of your diet, your goals, etc. So the information here is just a guide. It's not a prescription for anybody. So you really have to work with someone if you want to develop your own sports nutrition plan. But it's basically just divided into strength or power athletes who are interested in building muscle mass, endurance athletes, so people who may be training for triathlons or marathons, and then your stay fit recreational person who may be doing about an hour a day or maybe just 5 times a week or something like that. And then on the bottom, is example. So going across the top, we see that calories, carbohydrates, and protein are per, calories are per kilogram of body weight, and then carbohydrates and proteins are grams per kilogram of body weight, and there are ranges. And then fat is done as a percentage of your total calories. So is anyone really interested in this or have any questions about this? Because I don't want to be laboring information that's not necessarily applicable. I think one of my biggest take-home points there would just be to notice that the 150-pound example, it's quite a few calories, about 2,500 on average, quite a few carbohydrates, about 400 grams in the middle there. If you wanted to go for the higher end of the protein, that's about 80 to 90 grams per day. And then fat is the percentage of total calories, so I think it would be a little, like about 70 grams or so if you did the math. So, any questions about that? I know it's kind of a loaded slide, but it's mostly, like I said, intended for someone who is really getting interested in the numbers. And then I had to put this in, again, I think I've talked about this enough, but I said, try not to get preoccupied with the numbers, try the concepts of intuitive eating, such as honoring your hunger, feeling fullness, seeking satisfaction. And that's the hook with intuitive eating. It's not weight loss, it's really a health-centered paradigm, it's not a weight control or a diet plan. And the idea is to seek satisfaction, let go of the worry around food and the guilt and the shame, and kind of replace those things with a much more peaceful relationship with food and with satisfaction. Okay. So this too is kind of a slide geared towards a more competitive athlete. It kind of transitions into the nutrition when piece of sports nutrition. And it basically just talks about the things that you might be interested in, and the fact that if you are really serious about your training and you want to make sure your glycogen is in place and that you're reducing your inflammation, recovering more quickly and ready to go the next time you try to work out, that nutrition timing is important. Any questions?
No.
So these next few slides just kind of run through it. I think the last time I came, I had all these different slides trying to describe the same thing, so I went home and I tried to condense it. And so I feel a little bit better about the way this is presented, but I don't want to bore anybody. So how are you guys feeling? Like, what's your feedback at this point? I think the most useful thing here would be the food or drink. If you pay attention to that column, you're going to see specific examples. Because usually what I realize when I do these talks is most people just want to know, like, well, what do I eat? So again, I think you could learn from yourself by listening to your own body and trying out different combinations of your favorite foods. But having said that, there are guidelines, and I can certainly steer you in the direction of what I think might work based on the research. So, day before an event, fluids becomes very important, making sure you're hydrated, treating yourself like a sponge, and realizing that you're just keeping your body lubricated and yourself in a good position, hydration-wise. And then your lifestyle eating plan, or the balanced plate method that we just talked about. Monitoring the color of your urine is a very effective technique to understand if you're hydrated or not. And so if it's very, very yellow or looks like straw, that's probably a good indication that you need to drink more. Also, voiding about every 3 or 4 hours is a good rule of thumb. And then for fluid guidelines, they're very careful not to prescribe fluid guidelines because it's incredibly individual, and it will depend on other factors like how hot it is or how humid it is and what kind of a sweater you are, how salty of a sweater you are. And because it has to do with your electrolyte status, it is serious. So that's why no one's going to really give you a prescription for fluids. One of the things that is recommended is that you get to know your own, and this is for serious athletes, but you get to know your sweat rate by weighing yourself before a run, coming back and weighing yourself after a run, subtracting out any fluid you might have taken on board, so you have to kind of measure, did I have 20 ounces of water while I was out there, or whatever it was. And by doing the math, you can figure out how much you lost, and then it gives you an idea of what your sweat rate is. So that's something that somebody could work with you on if you were interested. But the guideline that you see there is to drink about 16 ounces 2 hours beforehand, so enough time to go to the bathroom before you start your event. And then about a half hour drinking about another cup of water or sports drink would be a good idea. Okay. So then 2 to 3 hours before an event, the optimal nutrients become carbohydrates, just as we talked about before, for the purpose of making sure your blood sugar is topped off, kind of giving you a little bit of fuel for the first hour of exercise. And so if you're lucky enough to be able to get up early enough to do this, then they're looking at like a basic mixed meal. And so hopefully it'll be something you've tried before that you incorporated into training and you know works well with you. So if it's a morning event, some of the breakfasts might be oatmeal, cereal, banana, toast, pancakes. Greek yogurt would be that combination if you were going to do the Greek yogurt with the syrup. That's more of like a a protein and carbohydrate. And then you see at their lunches would be very standard: turkey sandwich on hearty bread, noodle soup, thick crust pizza. So you see the emphasis on carbohydrates. Dinners would be typically, we think of pasta, but nothing wrong with having a stir fry or rice or quinoa or any sort of grain or whole or bread that you like. You could have pancakes for dinner if you want. So thinking outside the box and really understanding what works for you. Avoiding slow to digest high fiber foods and fatty foods the morning of or before an event is advisable. Okay, and then right before, I like to think of the 15 minutes to 30 minutes before an event as using that fistful of carbohydrates, or if it's running and food, duo of food, then maybe a sports drink. So that's where you have to decide. I think if you were going towards the lower end of the thing, just having the stuff on the left would be appropriate. If you were aiming for more like 300 calories, then having the combination of those foods, but those were some ideas. And so you can see a mixture of engineered sports foods and whole foods. Again, I'm a food first kind of person. I prefer whole foods. They tend to be less expensive, and I just prefer them. But it's your choice, and there certainly is a time and a place for engineered sports foods. Any questions here? Yeah.
What about having like a bowel movement before you go, like I'm training for a half marathon, like I notice I always have to go to the bathroom before, or else like once I start running. So does that have to do with like the digestion process, or like, and I know everyone is different with like how long after they go, after they eat and whatnot, but like should you eat something and then maybe give yourself enough time to like have to go to the bathroom, or is that more like a
I think you
personal-
should incorporate this into your training and really come up with what food and when works best for you. And so for you, I would think definitely, this is when you want to eat your white toast and your, pancakes that aren't whole wheat or buckwheat or anything like that. So we're looking for more refined carbohydrates that are just going to top you off before your event.
Okay.
But it may be like pre-race jitters too. And so for that, you can try mindfulness, you can try meditation. There's all sorts of apps out there. You can, anything that can get you to be calm and centered before the race and to kind of give you a chance to settle down. So, good question. And then another busy slide. What do I want you to notice here? Well, this is the intro. This would be your nutrition during. So this is important if it's going to be that endurance event. If it's exercise lasting less than 45 minutes, then food or drink is not practical or necessary. You just go out and do your thing and enjoy it. If it's high intensity exercise lasting 45 to 75 minutes, if you had that meal beforehand and maybe a little bit of a sports drink before you go, or a banana or half a banana, whatever it is, then you may be able to get away with it. I mean, I've been known to run for 75 minutes and not have to take anything with me, just drink water and be good. But when I get home, I have a plan for how I might recover. Yes.
So you say less than 45 minutes, meaning if I went out to a race in the morning at 9 a.m., I wouldn't have to eat breakfast, because I have no energy if I don't eat breakfast before
So
a race.
this is variable.
I see people who run 5 and 10Ks that don't eat a thing. And I'm
Yeah.
like, how can you stand up without that, much less run? For
Right.
you?
So very good. This is a during slide. So I'm really glad you asked that question. This is meaning like you wouldn't have to take anything with you.
Yeah.
You still want to follow the guidelines you saw in the previous slide for the
Especially
before.
breakfast, because you slept all night.
Exactly. Well, there's a big thing out there called like a fasted state cardio, which is supposed to help promote fat burning. And so some people like the idea of going overnight and breaking fast, skipping breakfast basically, and then going to exercise on an empty stomach because they're feeling like it's helping them burn fat. Honestly, I feel like there's a compensatory effect where people just get more hungry and eat more later on.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this is individuals. And so when someone comes in and tells me like, oh, I don't like to eat before, I never had a problem, I'm not going to argue with them. That's kind of an intuitive approach. And so unless they're running into problems, it's kind of that whole, like, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. But I agree with you. I like the idea of following the guidelines on the previous slide for before. Good question, and I'm glad you made the point, because right here we're talking about intra-sports nutrition.
I just had a question. I usually get up before work and do like an hour and a half of exercise, whether it be running or Stairmaster, and I don't eat anything before, because it's 5 in the morning and I just can't eat anything. But what are your thoughts on pre-workout? Because I do drink a pre-workout before. I
Is that a
noticed
brand or a type? Because I'm not familiar with
it's
that.
like a powder you put
Okay.
in water and you shake. It's like caffeine,
Yeah,
but
I'm not familiar with that exact one. Does it have calories and carbohydrate and that kind of stuff, or is it just a caffeine?
it's caffeine, maybe 10 calories in the powder, but you use it. I mean, it's like at like GNC
Yeah.
vitamin shop.
So what is your intention? To just give you energy, or what have you noticed that it does for you? Like, have you
It's
stopped?
just a burst of energy,
And do you feel it? Do you
Yeah.
feel it? Yeah, okay.
and I think that, like I said, I don't eat anything before because I just kind of roll out of bed, take that and go.
Okay.
But I noticed that I can do an hour and a half of running or intense exercise.
Yeah.
And I don't have issues.
So are you doing a pretty good meal the night before?
Yeah, and then I'll eat breakfast when I get home, but
Okay. Honestly, it's that whole if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I mean, that's pushing it. I think if you went any longer, you would start to feel that whole like hitting the wall kind of thing. And the other thing would be that you might try it. Might try to see what it would feel like to just eat a fistful of carbohydrates or drink something that had a little bit of carbohydrate in it, like cranberry juice or Pom Pom Wonderful or something like that. You might notice that even though you think you're doing pretty well, that you actually feel so much better. So I really feel like that's the way to work this out. Is, you just experiment.
okay.
Just kind of going along with the slide during exercise.
Yep.
When can you expect to see results of eating something during a race? Like how quickly does it
Great
come about
question.
and help you?
Yeah,
And
very
do you
good
need to
question.
plan for that ahead of time?
Fantastic question. So, that's the whole idea of eating like quick sugary carbohydrates. So things like graham crackers, animal crackers, fig Newtons, dried fruit, gummy bears. So you see the connection here is that you're wanting that quicker hit in your blood sugar.
Right.
So if you do that kind of food, then within 30 minutes. So I would like to say like a range of 15 to 30. And especially sports drinks, those would be even more fast. So there really is, Gatorade is a good product. It's a good one. So what do they say? They say if you know you're going out for longer than 90 minutes, like you're planning a long bike ride or you're planning a long running event, you should practice about 45 minutes into it would be when you want to take your first goo packet or chug of Gatorade or whatever it's going to be. So you start supplementing your carbohydrates around the 45-minute mark. And then after that, I feel like you can use your body as a guide, but after that, just being mindful and following these guidelines right here. The idea is that after the first, so if you start at 45 minutes, and then after that 60-minute mark, you're aiming for anywhere from 30 to 60 grams, depending on your weight and your intensity and all that kind of stuff. And so if you started at 45 minutes, then you might be doing it again in another 45 minutes. So does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, and again, it's all kind of experimentation. You might say, oh, when I did that, I didn't feel good or I felt sluggish. I'm going to do it more. Because I do work with people one-on-one, and we do this. We experiment, and someone will come back and be like, oh, no, I'm going to do it at 45 minutes, and then I'm going to wait a full hour. I'm just going to drink water. Because they decide that it just didn't feel good, or they got flavor fatigue too fast from some of those very, very sweet engineered products. So, but good question. All right, so I really, if anybody wants the slideshow after, I can send a PDF so we don't have to belabor the points, but I feel like it's a very good informative examples over there, because again, people are usually interested in what should I eat. And so notice again that there are some whole foods, there are some engineered sports foods. I just talked about flavor fatigue, which is real, like if someone is doing Gatorade and goo and fig Newtons and things like that, sometimes they get really tired of that sweet, sweet, sweet. So like cyclists often like to take like baby potatoes and wrap and boil them beforehand and have them in their pockets. Some people take like a roll and inject it with jam, or some people like peanut butter if they're going for a long time and it's not too intense. They can handle a little bit of that fat and protein, so they make like peanut butter and banana sandwiches or peanut butter and honey. So again, it's really what works for you. Some people make little rice balls, eat the rice. And sodium. So sodium becomes important if you're going to be doing a really long event, because you need to make sure your electrolyte status stays balanced. Any other good questions? And that slide also talks about the sweat rate. Okay, and then this is the after slide. So after it becomes fluids to replenish any lost fluids and to rehydrate, carbohydrate to replenish your glycogen, and protein for that muscle growth and repair. So a lot of times we talk about this anabolic window that occurs about 30 to 60 minutes after you work out, especially after like an intense workout or a depleting workout or training. But this is most important when you have another session within 8 hours. So sometimes when people are training for a triathlon or something, they'll swim in the morning or run in the morning and have a swim workout plan later, or a bike workout plan later, or maybe a second run. That's when that anabolic window becomes even more important. And also the other factor is some people get hungry immediately after exercise and some people don't. For a lot of people, stressful exercise blunts hunger. So you can look at that two ways. Intuitive eating wants you to follow hunger, but you could look at it like, well, I know I just depleted myself. I know if I eat something within an hour, I'll probably feel better. I won't have as much muscle soreness. I'll be able to go again when I want to go again more easily. So you could just plan what we would call self-care, where you're going to just make sure you back up that workout into a good, well-balanced meal. Or you could wait until you're hungry. So it's kind of individual. So I like what is called consider the 3 and 4 rule of thumb. So and this is for depleting exercise. This is for if like you're training for a marathon or something like that. But 3 and 4 would be you have 3 eating episodes within 4 hours. So the first one might be just a snack, or like chocolate milk, let's say, is one of those ones out there that has this ratio of 3 parts carbohydrate to 1 part protein. So when you look at a cup of chocolate milk, I think it has about 23 grams of carbohydrate and 8 grams of protein. So that's the 3-to-1 ratio. So maybe within 30 minutes you're just going to have chocolate milk, or maybe it's another smoothie or something that you might enjoy. And then about within 2 hours, you might have whatever meal would come naturally next. And then at about the 4-hour mark, you might decide to have another snack, like maybe some fruit and nuts or whatever, some popcorn, whatever it is that your body is hungry for. So I like that fistful of carbohydrate 30 minutes, the balanced mixed meal 3 or 4 hours before, that fistful of carbohydrates right before, intra-sports nutrition depending on what you're doing, and following the guidelines I just presented. That 3 and 4 rule at the end, I feel like those are more manageable than any sort of real prescriptive numbers-based program. Any questions? And then fluids, always making sure you're hydrated and your electrolytes are in place. So that's where Gatorade and Whole Foods come in play. How are we doing on time? You good? We're coming up on the end, so I think this is a good timing. So I just put this slide in here. People a lot of times ask me about my favorite granola bars or energy bars. I happened to look and come across this website and I liked it. I liked her philosophy. I thought that the reason she picked the bars were good. I happen to like a lot of these in particular. I also happen to like the Kind bar, the original one. I think they've kind of sold out a little with some of their more recent formulas, like, they had to add chocolate and all this stuff. But whatever, if that's your passion, go for it. I happen to like the Vanilla Crisp Power Bar. We use that a lot for my young kids who are on the soccer fields and stuff like that. Yes?
I wasn't thinking about Power Bar, but I was thinking about those yogurts, those Faya yogurt crossover ones.
Yeah.
They've gotten ridiculous, where first it was plain yogurt, now it's got amaretto balls in it, and then it's got sugared nuts in it, and I was like, who's getting the benefit of just yogurt added to these things? So the stuff they add to all of these whole yogurt and good, bars, becomes a little overdone.
It's true. They always take a good thing and mess with it even further, just to drive
To
their
make
profits.
people eat it.
Yeah, to market. It's a market. It's such a huge market.
But it's not helpful after that point. You're having yogurt, but it's all the stuff you added to it.
Right. I know. You're absolutely making great points. And I guess, again, it's this context. Like, when are you using these? Are they replacing meals? Are you eating them all the time just because you're bored? So in other words, this is for nutrition for sports.
Yeah.
So it's easy to have in your pocket, or if it's like having one of these or skipping it until you get home ravenously hungry and then you overeat. So it's always about zooming in on the person and what's going on and what is their goals, what context are they behaving in, what is the intention behind the behaviors. And intuitive eating, I love it because it does give it grants people, and not that it has to grant them, but the idea is you give yourself unconditional permission to eat whatever you want with attunement. So that's the condition of the unconditional permission. So attunement just means that you are connecting. You're connecting. You don't cut yourself off from the neck up and just follow food rules, but you connect with the body and you start to learn that it has signals that will guide you. So it's a process. It's not an overnight thing. You don't just all of a sudden become an intuitive eater. But if you're willing to do the work and do the process, then it can kind of take some of the confusion away from these different products. Okay. Finally, I like the lemon zest Luna bar on occasion. When in the right context, I like those. So those are some of my personal preferences. This I put in there because people were interested in different types of protein powders. You hear about whey protein being beneficial for enhanced muscle protein synthesis after workouts and trainings. This came from consumerlab.com. They tested a whole bunch of them, and I tried to put in the ones that were approved per each category, so depending on which type of protein you like to take in. And then the ones on the other side were not approved. And so what did they test for? Well, accuracy of label claims, and then possible contamination with lead, cadmium, arsenic, and mercury. And then Colleen happens to like Shackley products. I happen to like these EAS ones, so I have the website there. And I just wanted to move on to these different types of claims that you might come across. And so, you'll hear things about like branched chain amino acids. You hear a lot about beta-alanine, creatine, branched chain, like I said, amino acids. So what is the bottom line? Well, the bottom line is, when I did my research and I really looked into this, it's, sometimes there's evidence to suggest that they may be true, but I always am food first. And before 1965, people worked really, really well on water and food. And so, to your point, it's a market, and it's a really profitable market. and food and water work just as well, unless of course you need to replace sodium and things like that. So again, a time and a place for everything. And when I really did the research also, while some research might show that these things are helpful, they're ubiquitous in the food supply, and none of them really enhance performance that much. There's never like this huge margin of like, oh, well, that's why I need to be doing this. So I would be careful as a consumer. Any questions on this? I know I have skipping through these last few. So this is my slide about protein. We just went through the protein powders, what some of the different amino acids can do for you. I just put this up here as an example of how it is found in food. So you see the grams of protein per serving of the different types of foods. And then on the bottom, there's examples with Muscle Milk and Cliff Builder, which are 2 engineered sports products. And it also has the costs per gram. So you can see that the cost of the food tends to be lower. Supplementing with branched-chain amino acids, which are your essential amino acids that you would need for growth and repair of your muscles. So they're leucine, isoleucine, and valine. So they sell them in 5 to 20 gram doses, and so you basically divide that up and have about 20 grams maximum per day. So it says it seems to be safe, but again, doesn't necessarily improve performance. So I much prefer to see people getting it from food. Leucine may be the limiting factor in initiating muscle protein synthesis, so consuming leucine-rich proteins may boost that after intense physical activity. So foods containing that would be dairy, beef, poultry, seafood, pork, peanuts, beans, lentils, and soybeans. So again, it's fairly widespread. How to get your essential amino acids. I'm hitting the same point over the head here, but there's a slide with isoleucine and leucine. And you can see that you can choose like a Met-Rex whey protein, 1 scoop, or you could choose tuna fish, cottage cheese, or chicken breast. Protein supplements are safe and can be an effective source of protein, useful for building muscle and strength when part of adequate calories and carbohydrates. So that's the take-home message I started with. It comes full circle. Athletes need carbohydrates and calories. They fuel the workout. And in order to build muscle, you need to be doing resistance training. So it's not just like you eat protein, you get muscle. It needs to be part of a well-rounded resistance training program. What do we do at home? We eat a lot of healthy, good food, some fun food, some things that are mainstream and maybe not as nutritious as they could be. And then we always do have like a protein powder in the cupboard for in context. Like if my husband goes cycling and he wants a quick something, he'll often make a smoothie and just add it in. Or if we want the kids to be satiated and we're making a smoothie, we'll just put a scoop in. But we don't overdo it, and it's not at the expense of other foods. And then my plug for, if you do dairy, it's a good way, a quick and easy source of protein. And for example, ricotta cheese and cottage cheese are actually the original whey protein. And finally, research shows that muscle protein synthesis in trained athletes is 25% higher, which is quite significant, when protein is evenly distributed across breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So aiming for about 20 to 30 grams of protein per meal is advisable, and you can do that just by following the tape method. Okay, I think we're running out of time. I'll just tell you that the last slide here, or the last couple, this one tells you how you might evaluate dietary supplements. So questions to consider, and websites there that are good, like when you are confused, these are reputable websites. In some, nutrition and sports performance are linked. When and what you eat does matter, and it's important to include nutrition as part of your training to determine what works best for you. I put in here a slide that might help you if you were trying to carve out a good eating lifestyle plan. So this is kind of the zoom out. I have a link down here to a podcast that I happen to really like. Her name is Christy Spence, who is the one who's interviewed, and she gives a lot of good advice, kind of consistent with what I just gave you. And then zooming in, if you really wanted to work around a workout, you could use a chart like this and just try stuff, Just say to yourself, I'm going to do this, I'm going to, and see how it works, make notes, check in with yourself to see how you feel. And that's it. So thank you so much. I hope we ended on time. And if there's any other questions, I'm more than happy to talk with you, or questions about intuitive eating, or I'm thinking I might, because my two passions kind of are sports nutrition and intuitive eating, so I think I should write something about intuitive eating for athletes, because I think it could be done. So stay tuned. Thank you. Thank you for coming.